My son thinks I am rotting in a nursing home, too senile to recall my own birthday. Inside the lawyer's conference room, he is telling his new wife that today they finally take everything. But on the other side of these heavy oak doors, I am standing straight. I spent 40 years auditing ledgers, and I know exactly what they stole. Before the sun sets, I will prove that I am very much awake. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 67 years old. To the world outside, I am just another widow in Cleveland, a grey-haired woman shuffling through her twilight years. My family looks at me and sees a burden, an expired asset that takes up too much space. They forget that for 30 years I was the chief accountant for a major insurance conglomerate. I spent decades finding the truth hidden in columns of numbers. I know how to spot a lie, and I know how to balance a ledger. I stood in the dim corridor of the Prendergast building in downtown Cleveland. The air smelled of lemon polish and old dust. The heavy mahogany door to the conference room was closed, but the wood was not thick enough to block out the sounds of betrayal. Inside, my relatives were gathering. I could imagine them sitting in rows, exchanging cold handshakes and plastic smiles, the air thick with greed and impatience. They were vultures, circling what they believed was a carcass. Standing beside me was Mariah Lewis. She was a black woman of 50 years, sharp and solid as granite. She was my new attorney, though no one inside that room knew she existed. She stood perfectly still, her hand resting lightly on a leather briefcase. I leaned on my cane, not because I needed it to stand, but because it anchored me against the rage simmering in my blood. Through the door, I heard a voice I used to adore. Gregory Hart, my only son. He is over 40 now. A man who wears Italian suits and drives a car worth more than my first house. He was speaking to his new wife, Tessa. Today, we officially take over her entire estate, Gregory said. His tone was not sad. It was triumphant. It was the voice of a CEO closing a merger. Tessa let out a short, cruel laugh. You handled it all so well, darling. The power of attorney, the transfer to the nursing home, and the new will. The old bat doesn't even know what day it is. Her words cut through the wood like a serrated knife. A coldness spread through my chest, freezing the beat of my heart for a second. I had wiped Gregory's nose, paid for his college, and bailed him out of his first 2 failed businesses. Now he was sitting in there, legalizing the theft of my life's work while his wife mocked my sanity. But I did not cry. Crying is for the helpless. I was not helpless. Then another voice spoke up. It was Victor Hale, Gregory's lawyer. He was a man with a slippery smile and a reputation for bending the truth until it snapped. We are just waiting on the full count of heirs to begin, Victor announced to the room. As for Mrs. Evelyn, I am afraid her health does not permit her to attend. She is resting. Resting. That was their code word for discarded. Mariah tilted her head slightly toward me, her voice a low whisper that only I could hear. Are you ready? My knuckles were white as I squeezed the handle of my cane. I took a breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the hallway. I have been waiting for this moment since the day they decided to sign my name on papers they thought I would never understand. I replied. Mariah nodded once. She reached out and pushed the heavy double doors open. The hinges groaned. We stepped across the threshold together. The chatter inside the room died instantly. 20 heads turned. Gregory froze mid-laugh, his mouth hanging open. Tessa turned the colour of ash. Victor Hale dropped his pen. I walked straight in. My back was rigid. My eyes were clear. I swept my gaze across the room, locking eyes with my son. The question hung heavy in the silence, terrifying them all. How could the senile old woman they left to rot be standing here, sharp as a tack, just before they could steal the very last dime? The silence in the boardroom was heavy, but my mind drifted back to where this nightmare truly began. It started exactly 1 year ago, in a sterile doctor's office that smelled of rubbing alcohol and bad news. The neurologist had looked at me with pity as he explained that I had suffered a mild stroke, resulting in early signs of cognitive decline. I sat there, feeling the blood drain from my face, terrified of losing the sharp mind that had been my greatest weapon. Beside me, Gregory gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. "Oh, God." "Mom," he had whispered, his voice trembling. But I saw it. For a split second, before he composed his features into a mask of filial concern, his eyes did not show fear. They flickered with calculation. It was the look of a man who had just realized an obstacle had turned into an opportunity. That very evening, Gregory made his first move. We were sitting in my living room, the tea cooling on the table. "Mom, you need to rest," he said, leaning forward with an intensity that felt suffocating. "You should not be worrying about the market or the accounts at Northcrest Financial Group anymore. It is too much stress. Let me handle it for safety." I looked at him, my heart aching with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. I remembered the days when we had nothing, when I worked 60 hours a week auditing books just to put food on the table and pay for his private school tuition. He was my entire future. I wanted to believe that he was now trying to protect me in return. I suppose I am getting tired," I admitted softly. Enter Tessa. She was his second wife, 15 years his junior, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She played the role of the perfect daughter-in-law flawlessly. She brought over casseroles and adjusted my shawls, her perfume lingering in my house long after she left. "Don't you worry about a thing. Evelyn," she would coo, patting my shoulder. "Just enjoy your golden years. We are here to take the burden off your shoulders." But the burden they wanted to remove was my autonomy. As the weeks went by, their voices dropped whenever I entered the room. I began to notice a pattern in their questions. They were no longer asking how I felt. They were asking about the password to my primary savings account. They asked about the deed to the rental properties I owned outside of Savannah. They asked about the old bonds I had tucked away. Then came the night Gregory arrived with a thick stack of papers. The house was quiet, and I was feeling particularly weary, my hand trembling slightly as I held my teacup. "I just need you to sign these." "Mom," Gregory said, sliding the documents across the coffee table. His voice was smooth, like warm syrup. It is just a standard power of attorney so I can sign for some small transactions. You do not need to worry your head about the details." I squinted at the dense text. "Gregory, I should read this first." He sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. He pulled a pen from his pocket and clicked it. "Mom, please. It is late. You are tired. Just sign where I marked the X so you can go to sleep. Do you not trust me?" That question was a trap. I was exhausted, my vision blurring slightly from the medication. I took the pen. I signed. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from the bank. I reached for it, but Gregory was faster. He snatched it from the mail pile on the hall table. "That is mine," I said, frowning. "It is just technical paperwork." "Mum," he said, stuffing it into his briefcase, "I will look at it later. You would not understand the new regulations anyway." I stood there, staring at his back. That was the moment the line blurred between trusting my son and losing control of my life. The whispers grew louder. I began to catch fragments of conversations between Gregory and Tessa when they thought I was napping in the sunroom. "If we sell the lake house now," Tessa whispered one afternoon. "We need to consolidate the accounts first," Gregory replied, his voice low. "Then we find a facility, a better nursing home, one that does not ask too many questions." I lay still, my eyes squeezed shut, listening to them dismantle my existence. They were not planning for my care. They were planning a life where I no longer existed as a person, only as a source of funds. My son was not clearing a path for my comfort. He was clearing a path to erase me. My life began to shrink, not by miles, but by inches. It started with the small indignities that stripped away my autonomy. First, my car keys vanished from the brass hook by the back door. When I asked about them, Gregory told me the mechanic was looking at the transmission, but the car never returned. Then, my credit cards were declined at the pharmacy. When I called the bank, the teller informed me the accounts had been frozen for security reasons, initiated by the primary power of attorney. I was no longer the master of my own finances. I was a dependent. Gregory began visiting on Sunday afternoons, pressing a crisp $50 bill into my palm as if I were a child receiving an allowance. "It is just for pocket money." "Mum," he said, closing my fingers over the bill. "You do not need to carry cards and risk losing them. It is safer this way." I did not argue. I realized that fighting him openly would only accelerate his plan. Instead, I waited. One Tuesday, when Gregory was at his country club, I let myself into his home office. I knew he kept the spare key under the pot of the ficus plant in the hallway. He was a creature of predictable habits. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. There it was, a document titled Full Durable Power of Attorney. It bore my signature, looped and slanted in blue ink. But as I stared at the paper, a cold certainty settled in my stomach. I had never seen this document before. Beneath it lay another stack of papers, a last will and testament, dated just 3 weeks ago. I read the text. "All assets, real and liquid, are to be bequeathed to Gregory Hart, sole beneficiary, with the understanding that he provides adequate care for his mother for the duration of her natural life." The word understanding made my accountant's brain scream. It was vague. It was non-binding. It was a loophole wide enough to drive a truck through. I reached for the magnifying glass Gregory kept on his desk. I brought the lens down to the signature on the will. To a layman, it looked perfect. But I had spent 30 years auditing insurance fraud. I knew how to look for the hesitation in a pen stroke. The loop on the Y in Evelyn was a fraction of a millimeter too short. The slant of the H in Hart was just 2 degrees too vertical. Someone had practiced my signature, perhaps hundreds of times, but they lacked the muscle memory of 60 years. It was a forgery, and a good one, but it was still a lie. I knew I needed to document this, but I could not use a computer that he might monitor. I found a small, black notebook and hid it under the cushion of my favorite armchair in the living room. That night, I began to test my own mind. I wrote down the date, the time, the weather, and exactly what I had eaten for lunch. I wrote down every word Gregory said to me. I was auditing my own life, creating a paper trail of my sanity. 2 days later, Gregory sat me down with a glossy brochure. I found a place. Mom, he said, his voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. It is called Silver Pines Care Residence. It is beautiful. Out in the suburbs. They have nurses there 24/7. You would be safe there. You would not have to worry about the house anymore. He could not look me in the eye. He focused on the brochure, tracing the picture of a smiling elderly couple. It looks expensive, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Do not worry about the money, he replied quickly. I will handle the finances. He left his laptop open on the kitchen island when he went to the bathroom. I moved with a speed that defied my aching joints. The screen was bright, displaying an email from Victor Hale. Attached was the fee schedule for Silver Pines, but the body of the email was what stopped my breath. Once she is admitted and deemed a resident, Victor had written, we can expedite the asset consolidation. The transfer of the deed requires her physical vacancy from the property. That night, lying in bed, I heard the front door open. It was Tessa. She and Gregory stood in the hallway, thinking I was asleep. I am tired of driving out here. Greg, Tessa hissed. Sell this place. We can get that penthouse in the city if we liquidate the lake house and this dusty old trap. Keep your voice down, Gregory whispered back, though his tone lacked any real reprimand. Just let Silver Pines handle the transition. The papers are signed. It is done. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan. A tear leaked from the corner of my eye, hot and salty. For the first time in my life, I saw my son not as the boy I raised, but as a cold-blooded operator. He did not see a mother in the next room. He saw a line item on a spreadsheet, a cost that needed to be cut to maximize profit. And at that moment, the mother in me died, and the auditor woke up. The walls of the Riverside Neurology Center were painted a calming shade of beige that made me want to scream. I sat on the crinkling paper of the exam table, expecting a routine blood pressure check. Instead, Dr. Evans, a man I had trusted for 5 years, slid a clipboard toward me. Gregory wants to ensure that all your decisions are legally protected. Evelyn, he said, avoiding my gaze by adjusting his stethoscope. This is just a standard competency evaluation. It helps. It helps keep the records straight. I felt a cold prickle of dread. They were building a file. They were constructing a paper version of me that was broken, confused, and in need of a keeper. In the days that followed, the world began to soften around the edges. Gregory insisted on managing my medication. He started giving me 2 blue pills every evening with my tea. To help you sleep. Mum, he would say, watching until I swallowed. But they did not just make me sleep. They made the mornings foggy. My hands, once steady enough to balance a ledger to the penny, began to tremble. My thoughts felt like they were moving through molasses. And coincidentally, Gregory was always there during those hazy hours, usually with a pen in his hand, guiding my fingers to a signature line on a document I could barely focus on. One rainy Tuesday, he drove me to Victor Hale's office. The rain slashed against the windows of the town car, blurring the city into streaks of grey. Inside, Victor's office was dim, lit by lamps with amber shades that cast long, distorting shadows. Just some minor updates. Evelyn, Victor said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. We want to ensure your long-term care is guaranteed. This clause here, it creates a safety net for you. It protects you. I looked at the dense paragraphs. The words seemed to swim. Asset consolidation, irrevocable trust, primary guardianship. I started, my tongue feeling thick in my mouth. I don't recall discussing a trust. It is for your safety. Mum? Gregory interrupted, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. The weight of it felt heavy, oppressive. Just sign here. Victor knows best. I signed. I hated myself for it. But the fight had been drained out of me by the blue pills and the relentless pressure. I felt like I was watching myself from the ceiling, a puppet moving on strings. On the drive home, the windshield wipers slashed back and forth like a metronome. Gregory turned up the radio, some classical piece that was too loud for the small space. You see, he said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, I promised Dad I would look after you. I will not let anyone take advantage of you. Mom, not anyone. The irony tasted like bile in my throat. He was the fox, promising to guard the henhouse, and I was the hen who had just handed him the key. The fog lifted slightly 2 weeks later with a phone call. It was Rachel, my late husband's daughter. She was 35 years old and lived in Chicago. We were not blood-related, but I loved her as if she were my own. Evelyn, her voice sounded tinny over the receiver. I went to the bank in the city to check on Dad's old papers in the safety deposit box. The manager told me my access was revoked, and he said the box was empty. Why would the old will be gone? I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. What do you mean gone? The box is empty. Evelyn. The will that left the lake house to me. It is not there. I hung up and immediately called the bank manager, using the last ounce of authority I could muster. He confirmed it. Gregory Hart, acting under full power of attorney, had accessed the box 3 days ago. He had removed the outdated documents per his authority. The realization hit me harder than the stroke ever had. Gregory was not just stealing from me. He was erasing Rachel. He was cutting out anyone who was not him, anyone who might have a claim to a single dollar of the estate. He was burning bridges he hadn't even built. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house was silent. My tea had gone cold in my hands. I did not take the blue pills Gregory had left on the counter. I stared at the darkness outside the window. I understand now. I whispered to the empty room. If I do not do something, I will die in a place I do not know, signing papers I do not remember. And my son will call it fate. I poured the cold tea down the sink. I flushed the blue pills down the drain. The auditor was back on the clock. The next morning, I waited until Gregory left for his golf game and Tessa was in the shower. I slipped out the back door, hailing a cab 2 blocks away to avoid being seen by the neighbors. My destination was the old stone church on Maple Street, a sanctuary from a life that had become a prison. Pastor Thomas, a friend from my youth who had grayed along with me, listened to my breathless explanation and immediately made a call. 20 minutes later, I was introduced to Mariah Lewis. Mariah was not just a lawyer. She was a force of nature wrapped in a tailored blazer. She specialized in elder law and financial abuse cases. In her small, cluttered office at the back of the parish hall, I laid my life on her desk. I placed the small black notebook, the crumpled receipts I had fished out of the trash, and the printed copies of the emails I had stolen from Gregory's laptop. I may be old, but I am not stupid, I told her, my voice shaking slightly from the adrenaline. They are doing something with my name, and I want to know exactly what it is. Mariah picked up the notebook. She read through my entries, dates, times, conversations, inconsistent signatures. Her eyes lit up, not with amusement, but with the sharp focus of a predator recognizing prey. This is not just a family dispute. Mrs. Hart, Mariah said, tapping a page where I had noted the bank transfer. There is a massive difference between a legal power of attorney and financial exploitation. What you have described here, with the will and the irrevocable transfers, this is theft wrapped in legal jargon. We wasted no time. Using my rights as the account holder, rights Gregory thought I had forgotten, we requested full transaction histories from the bank and a copy of the admission contract from Silver Pines. The fax machine hummed, spitting out paper that confirmed my worst fears. Gregory and Victor had used the forged power of attorney to consolidate 90% of my liquid assets into a joint account under Gregory's name. They had effectively drained my estate while I was still breathing. We stop this. Now, Mariah said. She drafted a document revoking all previous powers of attorney. We created a new, strictly limited power of attorney that required dual signatures for any transaction over $100. Then came the masterstroke, a new last will and testament. We found a notary in the next town over, someone unconnected to Victor Hale's network. This new will, Mariah explained as I held the pen, contains a specific condition. Gregory inherits only if there is absolutely no evidence of coercion, financial abuse, or involuntary commitment to a care facility. If there is even a whisper of misconduct, his share goes to zero. And where does it go? I asked. To the Hart Foundation for Elder Justice and to your stepdaughter, Rachel. Mariah replied. We locked the new will in a safety deposit box at a credit union across town, under a pseudonym known only to Mariah and me. But the legal paperwork was only half the battle. Mariah leaned across the desk, her expression serious. If we want to catch them, Mrs. Hart, really catch them, you have to let them think they are winning. You have to go back there and play the part. I nodded. You want me to be the confused old woman. I want you to be the victim they think you are, she said, because that is when they will get careless. She reached into her drawer and pulled out 2 items. The first was a silver cross on a chain, identical to the one I wore every day, but this one felt slightly heavier. Digital recorder, she whispered. Tap the back twice to start recording. It holds 40 hours of audio. The second item was a new cane. It looked like polished oak, just like my old one, but the handle had a tiny, almost invisible lens embedded in the curve. High-definition video, Mariah said. It feeds directly to a cloud server I control. I put the necklace around my neck and took the cane in my hand. It felt like a weapon. From this moment on, I said, testing the weight of the cane, I am no longer the grandmother they lead around by the nose. I am the auditor, and I am about to conduct the most thorough investigation of my career. Only this time, Mariah added, a grim smile touching her lips. The person you are auditing is your own son. I walked out of the church and back into the trap, but I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter in orthopedic shoes. The investigation moved from my kitchen table to the cold, hard reality of criminal intent. Mariah did not just look at my case. She looked at the entire ecosystem of Silver Pines. What she found turned my stomach. We sat in her office again, the air humming with the whir of a fan, as she laid out a timeline of complaints against the facility. There were dozens of them. Families claiming their loved ones lost money, title deeds transferred while patients were medicated, and complaints of coercion that were mysteriously withdrawn or dismissed. It is a pattern. Evelyn, Mariah said, her voice tight with anger. They target seniors with significant assets but limited family oversight. They declare them incapacitated, move them in, and within 6 months, the estate is gutted. She had tracked down a former administrator of Silver Pines, a woman who had been fired for asking too many questions. This woman revealed that the facility had a preferred list of attorneys they recommended to families to help expedite the paperwork. The name at the top of that list was Victor Hale. Victor is not just Gregory's lawyer, Mariah explained, sliding a photo across the desk. He appears in at least 3 other cases involving Silver Pines residents. In every single instance, the patient was declared incompetent by the same doctor, transferred to the facility, and their assets were liquidated shortly after. Then, a new will appeared. My hands shook as I held the photo. I was not just a mother being betrayed. I was a cog in a machine. But the true horror arrived with a man named Dalton Price. He was a private investigator Mariah had brought on board, a man with a face like worn leather and eyes that missed nothing. He placed a single sheet of paper on top of the pile. "I followed the money trail," Dalton said, his voice rough. "It turns out your son is not just a customer of Silver Pines. He is on their payroll." I felt the air leave the room. "What do you mean, referral fees?" Dalton clarified. "Kickbacks. Gregory has received 5 separate payments from a shell company linked to Silver Pines over the last 2 years. He is not just dumping you there. He is scouting for them. He convinces relatives, aunts, uncles, maybe even friends to hand over control, and then he delivers them to the facility for a commission." I sat in stunned silence. My son was a headhunter for a nursing home predatory ring. He was selling the elderly like used cars. That Sunday, I went to church, but I could not focus on the sermon. I saw a woman sitting 2 pews ahead. Someone Pastor Thomas had pointed out to me. Her name was Nora. She was frail, wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather. I approached her during the coffee hour. They told me it would be like a vacation, Nora whispered to me, her hands trembling around a styrofoam cup. My son said Silver Pines was safe. But once I signed the papers, I never saw my house again. They sold it. They sold everything. She looked at me, her eyes watery and full of a terrifying resignation. "Do not let them take your pen, dear. Once you sign, you disappear." Nora was the ghost of my future. She was what Gregory intended for me to become. Mariah took the evidence to the district attorney and the State Department of Justice. The scale of the fraud was enough to pique their interest, but they needed more than paper trails. They needed a smoking gun. They needed a confession on tape that linked the facility, the lawyer, and the recruiter directly to the act of fraud. "We need you to go back in there," Mariah told me, her hand resting on my arm. "The DA is willing to move, but only if we can nail them on intent. You have to keep playing the role. Evelyn, be weak. Be confused. Let them think you are fading. The more helpless you seem, the more arrogant they will become." And then I asked, "And then they will speak freely?" she replied, and we will be listening. I drove home that evening, the weight of the recorder heavy against my chest. I looked at the streets of Cleveland passing by, thinking of Nora shivering in her thin coat. If they want to see me as prey, I said to the empty car, my voice hard as flint, then I will show them what it feels like when the prey bites back at the jugular. Good news, Mom, Gregory announced, clapping his hands together as he walked into the living room. Silver Pines has an opening. The doctor insists you need professional care now to be safe. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced a sob to escape my throat. Oh, Gregory, please, I do not want to leave my home. I clutched his sleeve, my fingers trembling, playing the terrified, dependent mother to perfection. He patted my hand, his touch light and dismissive. It is for the best. Mom, you will see. It is just safer. I let out a shaky breath and nodded slowly, offering a surrender I did not feel. I watched the tension leave his shoulders. He thought he had won. He had no idea he was moving me exactly where I needed to be. The day I moved into Silver Pines, the facility smelled of antiseptic and expensive potpourri. I leaned heavily on my cane, ensuring the tiny lens in the handle was pointed directly at the facility manager, a woman named Denise Fowler. She had a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. We just need to handle the asset transfer process to ensure your care costs are fully covered. Mrs. Hart? Denise said, sliding a stack of papers toward Gregory. I blinked, looking around the room with feigned confusion. Do I still have a house? Do I need to sign anything? Denise exchanged a glance with Gregory before leaning in, speaking to me as if I were a toddler. We are transferring the ownership of the house to Gregory to avoid any legal trouble for you later. Dear, it is just paperwork. My cane captured every pixel of her face as she admitted to the scheme. Later that afternoon, they thought I was asleep in the armchair in the corner of my new, sterile room. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed to slits. Gregory, Victor, and Denise stood near the door. We can list the house in 3 months, Gregory said, checking his watch. Once the deed is recorded. Good, Victor replied. I will set the schedule for the new will reading. We need to lock this down before anyone asks questions. That night, the silence of the hallway was broken by the sound of weeping. It was coming from the room next door. It was a hollow, lonely sound that chilled my bones. It was not the sound of physical abuse, but the sound of absolute abandonment. I recognized the voice. It was Nora, the woman from church. I shuffled into her room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at a photo frame. I sat beside her and tapped the back of my silver cross twice. Nora, I whispered. Tell me what happened to your house. She looked at me, her eyes red. He took it. Evelyn, my son. He said it was for tax purposes. And now? Now he says there is no money left to take me home. I held her hand, letting the recorder capture her testimony. Her story was a carbon copy of the script Gregory was using on me. It was the corroborating evidence we needed to prove a systemic pattern. Over the next few weeks, Mariah and Dalton visited me frequently, to the staff. They were a concerned niece and a volunteer from the church. In reality, they were couriers, in the privacy of the garden. I would slip the memory cards from my cane and necklace into Mariah's palm, and she would slide fresh ones back to me. The pile of evidence grew higher every day. Gregory became arrogant. He thought I was completely under his control, a faded shadow of his mother. He began to speak freely in my presence, no longer bothering to lower his voice. One afternoon, while looking for a document in his briefcase, he muttered, "Even if you knew how we handled the assets, Mum, you would not remember it by dinner time." The necklace recorded that, clear as a bell. Finally, the day arrived. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. Gregory came in to check on me one last time before the big meeting. "Tomorrow is the day," he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. I turned to him, making my eyes look glassy and distant. "Tomorrow is the day you take it all." "Right." Gregory paused. He looked at me, a smirk curling the corner of his mouth. He did not see a threat. He saw a victory. "That is right, Mum," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Everything of yours will officially become mine." I watched him walk out the door. He did not know it, but he had just handed me the golden bullet. The trap was finally set, and the jaws were about to snap shut. Mariah visited me under the guise of a church volunteer, her face calm, but her eyes burning with intensity. She leaned in close to my ear, whispering the words I had been praying to hear. "The district attorney has officially opened the file. Evelyn, we just need to keep gathering evidence until the reading. That is when we drop the hammer." To ensure the hammer struck true, we needed one final layer of armor. A neurologist independent of Gregory's payroll visited me during a routine checkup arranged by Mariah. Dr. Aris spent 2 hours testing my cognitive functions. The results were indisputable. I was fully competent, legally sane, and sharp as a tack. This report would serve as the shield against the fraudulent incapacity papers Victor had filed. Then came the financial blow. Dalton called Mariah while she was in my room, his voice crackling over the speakerphone. "I found them," Dalton said. "Gregory has accounts in the Bahamas. There is nearly $2 million sitting there. The deposits match the exact dates and amounts lost by 3 other Silver Pines patients over the last 3 years." It was the final link. My son was not just a participant. He was the banker for the entire operation. With this knowledge, Mariah helped me execute the most important transaction of my life. We established the Heart Foundation for Elder Justice. I transferred the majority of my remaining liquid assets and the rights to my stock portfolio into this trust, shielding them from the previous power of attorney. Then came the new will. It was a masterpiece of legal retribution. It stipulated that Gregory would receive a small annual stipend, but only if he remained free of any criminal convictions related to elder abuse or financial fraud. If he were convicted, every single penny would automatically divert to the foundation. "He holds the key to his own poverty," Mariah said, sealing the envelope. Now, I had to speed up the timeline. For the next 2 weeks, I became an actress worthy of an Academy Award. I slumped in my chair. I let drool gather at the corner of my mouth. When the nurses gave me the sedatives, I hid the pills under my tongue and spat them into a tissue the moment they looked away. To Gregory, it looked like I was falling off a cliff. "She is, fading fast." I heard him tell Victor on the phone. "We need to move the will reading up. Do it tomorrow." That was exactly what we wanted. The day before the reading, Gregory made his most fatal mistake. Believing I was practically comatose, he met with a real estate developer in the facility's visitor lounge. My cane was leaning against the wall, its camera lens unblinking. "I can sign the deed over today," Gregory boasted, his voice loud with greed. "We will settle for $1.5 million for a quick close. The old lady is out of the picture." He signed the contract to sell my home, the home I had built with his father, while I sat 10 feet away, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and anticipation. That evening, the final phase of our extraction plan began. I feigned a severe dizzy spell. The staff at Silver Pines called an ambulance, but this was not a medical emergency, it was a jailbreak. The ambulance took me not to the hospital Gregory preferred, but to a private medical center where Dr. Aris was waiting. There, I was admitted, stabilized, and documented as being in perfect health. Meanwhile, Silver Pines simply recorded that I had been discharged to hospital care. Gregory, assuming I was lying half dead in a hospital bed, sent an email to Victor that Dalton intercepted. "Tomorrow we read the will," Gregory wrote. "My mother is incapacitated and cannot attend." "Correct." "Correct." Victor replied. "We proceed without her." I read those words from the screen of Mariah's tablet, sitting upright in my hospital bed, fully dressed and sipping hot tea. They thought they had erased me. They thought I was a ghost. They had no idea that the ghost was about to walk through the front door and haunt them for the rest of their lives. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the room. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, but I only cared about 2. Gregory sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his mouth slightly open, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. Beside him, Tessa gripped her designer handbag so hard her knuckles were white. Victor Hale, the man who had drafted my demise, frowned, his eyes darting between me and the unknown woman standing at my side. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. I did not limp. I did not shuffle. I pulled the chair out and sat down, placing my cane against the table edge with a deliberate click. "Please," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Do not let me interrupt the theft." The room remained frozen. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. For months, Gregory had treated me like a piece of furniture, something to be moved and dusted until it could be sold. Now, watching him sweat in his tailored suit, I felt the first real spark of joy I had known in a long time. Mr. Henderson, the court-appointed probate lawyer who held the official jurisdiction over the estate, cleared his throat. He looked at the document in his hands, then at me. "Per the request of Mrs. Hart," Mr. Henderson announced, "we will be reading the last will and testament that was updated and notarized 3 months ago." Victor shot up from his seat. "Objection. That is impossible. Mrs. Hart has not had the mental capacity to update any legal documents for over a year. I have the medical records right here from Dr. Evans stating she is cognitively impaired." Mariah stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She simply slid a thick, sealed envelope across the table toward Mr. Henderson. "This is a certified competency evaluation performed 48 hours ago by Dr. Aris, the head of neurology at St. Jude's Hospital," Mariah stated. "It confirms that Evelyn Hart is fully cognizant, rational, and legally competent. Unlike the assessment from Dr. Evans, this one was not paid for by the beneficiary." Victor's mouth snapped shut. He looked at Gregory, panic flaring in his eyes. Gregory, realizing his legal footing was crumbling, decided to switch to the only role he had left the concerned son. He stood up, his face contorted into a mask of pity. "Mum?" Look at you, he said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. Why did you come here? You are confused. You should be resting at Silver Pines. This stress is going to kill you. I looked him dead in the eye. You can stop acting. Gregory. The audience has left the building. I am strong enough to sit here and listen to you try to take my estate. I am trying to protect you, Gregory shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Mariah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker. She pressed a button. The room filled with the static-laced sound of a recording, but the voice was unmistakable. That is right. Mom, everything of yours will officially become mine. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Gregory froze, his eyes widening as he recognized his own voice from the day he admitted me to that prison. Tessa looked away, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, looking at Gregory with thinly veiled disgust. He picked up the document Victor had provided, the one that gave everything to Gregory, and set it aside. That document is null and void, Mr. Henderson declared. I will now read the valid will. He began to read. The legal jargon flowed, but the meaning was sharp. To my stepdaughter, Rachel, who was unjustly removed from my life, I bequeath the Lake House property and 25% of the investment portfolio. I saw a few relatives gasp. Rachel was not even in the room, but her presence was suddenly looming large. To the Hart Foundation for Elder Justice, a newly formed trust dedicated to fighting financial exploitation, I bequeath 50% of my liquid assets. Gregory was shaking now. He looked like a man watching his house burn down. And finally, Mr. Henderson continued, his eyes flicking up to meet Gregory's stare. To my son, Gregory Hart, I leave a conditional stipend. This stipend is to be paid annually, provided that he is not under investigation for, or convicted of, any crimes related to financial fraud or elder abuse. Mr. Henderson paused for effect. If such an investigation occurs, or a conviction is upheld, his entire portion shall be forfeited immediately and transferred to the foundation. Gregory stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. This is a setup, he screamed, his face turning a violent shade of red. You cannot do this to me. I am your son. You are senile. I will contest this. I will bury you in court. You will not be burying anyone. Gregory, I said calmly. Just then, the heavy doors opened again. 3 men and 2 women in dark suits walked in. They did not look like relatives. They looked like the law. The suits who had just entered the room did not need to introduce themselves for the temperature to drop another 10 degrees. They carried the distinct, heavy air of authority. The lead officer, a woman with a badge clipped to her belt, stepped forward. State Prosecutor's Office, she announced, her voice cutting through Gregory's screaming. And the Financial Crimes Division. We have been listening to these proceedings pursuant to a warrant authorized this morning. Gregory slumped back against the wall, his face sliding from red to a ghostly pale. The prosecutor wasted no time. She placed a heavy stack of files on the table next to the invalid will. We have evidence confirming that Gregory Hart has been receiving kickbacks from Silver Pines care residents for the past 2 years, she stated, addressing the room but keeping her eyes locked on my son. He colluded with Victor Hale and Denise Fowler to systematically drain the assets of at least 5 elderly residents, funneling the proceeds into shell companies and offshore accounts. She slapped a stack of photographs onto the mahogany surface. They were grainy, but clear enough to show bank documents from the Bahamas. Next came printed emails and transcripts. Each piece of paper was a nail in the coffin of the successful businessman persona Gregory had spent 40 years building. Victor Hale and Denise Fowler, the officer said, nodding to her team. You are under arrest for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. I was just following the family's instructions, Victor stammered, sweat beading on his forehead as an officer pulled his arms behind his back. I am just the attorney? Save it for the judge, the prosecutor said, signaling for a snippet of audio to be played from her tablet. The room filled with Victor's voice from a recording Dalton had captured weeks ago. Find the ones with high equity and low family interference. We can squeeze them dry in 6 months. A collective shudder went through the relatives sitting in the chairs. Victor and Denise were marched out, their protests dying in the hallway. Then, the prosecutor turned to Gregory. Mr. Hart, she said, we also have you on tape saying, and I quote, old people do not remember anything. They will sign anywhere. Do you recall that Gregory did not answer? He looked at the handcuffs dangling from the officer's belt. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and a hatred so pure it broke my heart one last time. Mom, he choked out. Mom, if you do this, what do I have left? I looked at the boy I had raised, the man who had sold me for a commission fee. I did not feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow grief. You chose to look at me like a bank account to withdraw from, I said, my voice slow and clear. Do not be surprised when that account finally reports an error. The officers moved in. As the cold metal clicked around Gregory's wrists, Tessa let out a shriek. You cruel witch! She screamed at me, her mascara running down her face. How could you do this to your own family? Rachel stood up then. She had been silent the entire time, but now she towered over Tessa. Cruelty, Rachel said, her voice like ice, is dumping your own mother in a nursing home just so you can sell her house to buy a penthouse. That is cruelty. The room fell silent as Gregory was led away. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and finished reading the final clause of the valid will. Evelyn Hart retains full rights to the primary residence for the remainder of her life. Upon her passing, the property will transfer to the foundation. Rachel Hart is named co-trustee alongside Mariah Lewis. As for Gregory Hart, should he complete his sentence and any restitution programs, he may apply for a minimum annual stipend for basic living expenses. He holds no decision-making power regarding family assets. Ever. When the room finally cleared, only Rachel, Mariah, and a few stunned cousins remained. I sat in the chair, feeling the adrenaline fade, leaving behind a deep exhaustion. It was not a sweet victory. It was a cold relief. I did not get my son back. I whispered to the empty air. The son I loved was gone a long time ago, but at least I stopped the monster he became before he could destroy anyone else. We walked out of the Prendergast building 10 minutes later. The Cleveland sky was a slate grey, but the wind coming off the lake felt cool and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with freedom. Rachel held my arm gently as we descended the stone steps. What do we do now? Mom? She asked softly. I looked at the street, then at her. A tired smile touched my lips. We start by going home, I said. Really home. And we turn it into a place where no predator ever dares to knock again. Thanks so much for listening to my story. Everyone, I would love to know where you are all tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's get a conversation started if you enjoyed seeing justice served and want to support more stories like this. Please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe out there.